There was no sound to announce it, no sign that something important had just happened. The world did not pause, and no one else seemed to notice. It was a small moment, so small it could easily be missed. A breath held a little longer than usual, a thought left unfinished, a feeling allowed to pass without being chased. That was all, and yet everything began there. He did not know at that moment that his life had shifted. How could he? Nothing on the outside had changed. The same paths waited for him, the same faces, the same expectations, the same quiet pressures. But inside something softened. Something that had been tight for a long time finally loosened its grip. Have you ever felt that kind of moment? When nothing dramatic happens but something inside you settles, even just slightly? It is not relief, not yet. It is more like the end of resistance. Like setting down a weight you forgot you were carrying. For a long time his days had been filled with noise that never fully left him alone. Even in quiet rooms, his thoughts argued, replayed, prepared responses to words that had already been spoken or had not yet arrived. His body stayed alert, as if waiting for something to go wrong, as if peace was something that had to be earned or defended. That evening the noise was still there, but for the first time he did not rush to answer it. He noticed it instead. He listened without stepping inside the storm. And in that space between feeling and reaction, there was a strange calm, not comfort, just stillness. It did not feel powerful. It felt uncertain, almost empty. He wondered if he was losing something important, the sharpness that had kept him ready, the fire that had helped him survive. Without it, who would he be? Would he disappear into silence? The question stayed with him, but it did not demand an answer. Around him, life continued as it always had. People spoke, situations unfolded, expectations pressed quietly from all sides, and still that softness remained. Fragile, maybe, but real. It felt like the beginning of something he did not yet have words for. There is a kind of silence that feels like absence, and there is another kind that feels like depth. At first it is hard to tell the difference. One feels like loss, the other feels like space. He stood somewhere between the two, unsure which one he was touching. He remembered how often he had believed that reacting was the same as being alive, that speaking quickly meant being strong, that holding back meant giving in. These beliefs had guided him for years without ever being questioned. They had shaped his tone, his posture, even the way he breathed. But now, in this quiet moment, those beliefs did not rise to the surface. They waited, politely, as if unsure whether they were still needed. Nothing had been solved, nothing had been fixed, but the rush to fix everything was gone, and in its place was a gentle awareness, a noticing, the feeling of standing still long enough to hear what was happening inside. It was uncomfortable. Silence often is. It brings you closer to yourself than you might like. It removes the familiar distractions. It asks nothing, yet reveals much. He did not know it then, but this was the first time he had chosen not to move away from his own inner world, not to fight it, not to shape it into something acceptable, just to sit with it. The decision was small, almost invisible, but small decisions are often the ones that change everything, not because they are dramatic, but because they are honest. As the night grew quieter, he remained where he was, breathing, listening, allowing the moment to be what it was, no more, no less. And somewhere in that stillness, a life began to turn, not loudly, not all at once, but gently, like water finding a new direction, without ever announcing that it had done so. After that moment, silence did not feel peaceful. It felt heavy. It followed him like a shadow that grew longer as the days passed. When he chose not to speak, not to react, not to explain himself, the quiet did not reward him. It pressed against his chest. It asked questions without words. There were times when he wondered if he had made a mistake, if holding back was the same as hiding, if keeping his thoughts inside meant they would turn against him. Silence has a way of doing that. It gives emotions space to move, and not all of them are gentle. He felt the pull to fill the space, to say something, anything, just to feel lighter again. Words waited at the edge of his tongue, ready to be released. Old habits whispered that relief lived there, that peace could be found in expression. But when he paused, truly paused, he noticed something else. The feeling did not disappear when he stayed quiet. It changed. At first it grew stronger. Unspoken thoughts have a weight of their own. They gather shape in the dark. They ask to be seen. He felt them rise in his body, tightening his shoulders, slowing his breath. It was uncomfortable in a way that could not be explained to anyone else. Have you ever sat with a feeling you could not name? Not sadness, not anger, but something in between, a restless pressure, a quiet ache. It does not shout. It waits. He learned that silence does not remove pain, it reveals it. Without reaction, there is no escape. The mind cannot distract itself with movement or sound. It must stay, it must look. In those moments, he felt alone. Not because others were absent, but because no one could enter that space for him. This kind of quiet is private. It belongs only to the one who carries it. And that can feel frightening. Sometimes, the urge to break the silence felt almost physical. His hands would tense, his jaw tighten. He imagined how easy it would be to release everything at once, to explain, to defend, to push the discomfort outward. For a moment that release felt like freedom, but he noticed something else too. Each time he did not react, the feeling after reaching its peak would slowly soften, not vanish, just settle, like a wave that rises high and then returns to the water without being forced. This was new. He had never stayed long enough to see that part. The silence taught him patience without asking his permission. It showed him that emotions move on their own when they are not interrupted, that not every feeling needs a response. Some only need time. Still, the weight did not disappear overnight. Some evenings felt longer than others. Some nights stretched on with thoughts that circled back again and again. He questioned himself, his choice, his strength. Was this calm or was it avoidance? Was he growing or simply enduring? The silence did not answer. It never does. What it offered instead was honesty. When there was nothing to say, there was no place to hide. He could feel his fear clearly, his doubt, his longing to be understood. These feelings had always been there, but noise had covered them. Now they sat beside him, and slowly something shifted. The silence began to feel less like a burden, and more like a mirror. It reflected what was real without judgment, without urgency. He realized that discomfort does not mean something is wrong. Sometimes it means something important is being touched, something that has been ignored for too long. As he sat with the quiet, breathing through it, he sensed a thin thread of steadiness forming underneath the weight. It was not confidence, not yet. It was endurance, the quiet kind that grows when nothing else is done. And in that endurance he found a strange relief, not from the silence, but within it, a sense that he could remain present without breaking, that he could feel deeply without losing himself. The silence was still heavy, but it no longer felt endless. As the days passed, the quiet around him began to draw attention. Not the kind that arrives openly, but the subtle kind, side glances, pauses in conversation. The space that appears when someone expects a response and none comes. They noticed his silence and they gave it meaning of their own. At first he tried not to care. Silence, after all, was something he had chosen for himself. But it is difficult to remain untouched by the way others interpret what they cannot understand. When words are absent, assumptions speak loudly. They thought he had nothing to say, that he had run out of strength, that he had accepted something he should have resisted. Some saw his stillness as agreement, others saw it as fear. A few saw it as indifference, which hurt in a different way. He felt those judgments without anyone needing to voice them. They lived in the air, in the way conversations moved on without him, in the way S lingered, then looked away. Have you ever been present yet unseen? Standing quietly while others decide who you are, simply because you did not correct them? There were moments when he wanted to explain himself, to say that his silence was not empty, that it was full of thought, of effort, of restraint. He wanted to tell them how much it took to remain calm, how loud everything still felt inside. But explanations require an opening, and there was none. Instead, he listened. He observed how easily silence becomes a blank page for others to write on, how quickly quiet is mistaken for weakness or distance or surrender. At times, this misunderstanding felt heavier than the silence itself. It created a new kind of loneliness. Not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of being misread. He asked himself if it was worth it, if staying quiet meant allowing others to decide his story, if strength should always be visible to be real. The old impulse returned softly but persistently. Speak now, correct them, defend yourself, reclaim control. But something held him back, not fear, not pride, something quieter, a sense that reacting would pull him away from the calm he was learning to protect. So he stayed where he was. He noticed that those who misunderstand often do not seek clarity. They seek confirmation of what they already believe. Words offered too quickly would not change that. They would only feed the noise. Still, it hurt. There is a particular pain in being reduced to something smaller than you are, in feeling your inner effort go unseen, in realizing that your quiet discipline looks, from the outside, like nothing at all. He carried that pain silently. He did not harden against it. He allowed it to be felt, just as he had learned to do with everything else. In that space, a question began to form, a gentle one that did not demand an answer right away. Who was his silence really for? Was it meant to convince others of something, or was it meant to keep him close to himself? The question lingered. He realized that if his calm depended on being understood, it was fragile. If his self-respect depended on approval, it could be taken away. But if his silence was rooted in something deeper, something inward, then misunderstanding could not undo it. This thought did not remove the discomfort, but it gave it shape. It helped him see that being misunderstood was not a failure of his choice. It was simply a consequence of it. Not everyone recognizes quiet strength. Not everyone values restraint. Some only trust what is loud, what reacts quickly, what demands attention. He began to accept that his path would not always be visible, that the work he was doing inside himself would often go unnoticed. And strangely, that acceptance brought a small relief. He did not need to correct every false impression. He did not need to carry the burden of how others saw him. That weight was never truly his. As this understanding settled in, his silence changed again. It was no longer defensive, no longer uncertain. It became steadier, less concerned with how it appeared. They still misunderstood him. That did not change. But he no longer felt the need to step out of himself to be seen. And in that quiet resolve, something important took root, a sense that being known by others mattered less than being honest within. And for the first time, being misunderstood did not feel like a loss. It felt like a boundary. The realization did not arrive suddenly. It did not interrupt his thoughts or demand his attention. It came slowly, almost shyly, as if it did not want to be mistaken for something dramatic. It began as a question that returned again and again, each time a little softer. What if reacting was not strength? For most of his life, he had believed that power lived in immediacy, in answering quickly, in proving presence through response. Silence, in comparison, had always felt like absence, like something missing. But now, after spending so much time within it, that belief no longer felt certain. He noticed how reactions rose before thought, how they borrowed energy from old wounds, how easily they carried him away from himself. A single word, a single look, and his inner world could be thrown into motion without his consent. and he began to wonder why he had trusted that movement so much. There were moments when he felt the familiar pull to respond, to defend, to explain. But now, before a sitting, he could see the impulse clearly. He could feel where it came from. Not from calm, but from tension. Not from clarity, but from habit. This noticing changed everything. He saw that reacting gave others a kind of access to him, a way to reach inside and disturb what he was trying to steady. Each response handed over a piece of control, often without him realizing it. Was that power? Or was it surrender in disguise? The thought unsettled him, not because it felt wrong, but because it felt true. In the quiet, he began to sense a difference between expression and reaction. Expression felt intentional, grounded. Reaction felt automatic, unchosen, like a door opening without being asked. Silence, he realized, was not emptiness. It was space, and in that space, choice lived. This understanding did not make silence easy, but it made it meaningful. He no longer stayed quiet because he was unsure. He stayed quiet because he was aware, because he could feel the moment before the impulse, and he could choose not to follow it. This choice was subtle, almost invisible. No one applauded it. No one even noticed. But inside, it felt like standing on firmer ground. He also began to notice something else. The more he did not react, the more his inner world slowed. Thoughts became less sharp, less urgent. Emotions still arrived, but they no longer demanded immediate action. It was as if his mind was learning to trust him. Have you ever felt that shift? When your thoughts know low. Anger push you forward, but wait. When feelings rise but do not control your steps. That was what this realization brought him. Not mastery, not control, but a quiet partnership with himself. He understood then that silence was not something to endure until clarity arrived. Silence was where clarity was formed. Reaction scattered his attention. Silence gathered it. This did not mean he would never speak again, or that words no longer mattered. It meant that words would come from a different place, a place that was not rushed, not wounded, not desperate to be seen. The realization settled deeper with time. He saw that inner power was not loud. It did not announce itself. It did not need witnesses. It lived in the moments no one else could see when he chose restraint over release. He felt a strange gratitude for all the times he had been misunderstood, for all the moments silence had been uncomfortable. They had led him here, to this understanding, that reacting had always been easy, but staying present without reacting required something else entirely. It required respect for himself. As this thought took root, his silence changed again. It was no longer something he was practicing. It was something he trusted. He did not feel above others. He did not feel distant. He felt aligned, as if his outer stillness finally matched an inner decision that had been waiting for years. And in that alignment there was a calm strength. Not the kind that pushes outward, but the key, ND, that holds steady no matter what passes by. The realization did not end his journey, but it showed him where it truly began. The moment arrived quietly, as these moments often do. There was no warning, no time to prepare, just a familiar situation unfolding in the same way it always had before. Something was said, something that would once have pulled a response from him without effort. His body recognized it immediately, the tightening in his chest, the warmth rising in his face, the old urge to speak, to correct, to protect himself. For a brief instant everything paused. He could feel the words forming, ready to be released. They were clear, sharp, well-practiced. They promised relief, a sense of balance restored. He knew exactly how the exchange would go. He had lived it many times before, but this time he noticed the pause. It was small, almost invisible, the space of a single breath, yet within it there was a choice. Do you ever notice that moment? The one that arrives just before you act, It does not stay long. It waits quietly, hoping to be seen. He stayed with it. He felt the discomfort of not reacting. It moved through him like a slow heat. His mind searched for reasons to speak, for justifications that sounded like truth. But beneath them, he sensed something else, a desire not to win, not to be right, but to remain steady. So he did nothing. The silence that followed felt louder than any response. It stretched between him and the other presence, filled with unspoken meaning. His heart beat slowly, deliberately. Each moment of quiet felt like effort. He wondered how the silence looked from the outside. Weak, confused, empty? The old fear stirred, but he did not follow it. Instead, he listened to himself. He noticed how the urge to react began to fade when it was not fed. Like a fire without fuel, it lost its intensity. The sharpness softened. The need to speak dissolved into a quiet awareness. This surprised him. He had always believed that silence would trap his emotions inside him, that they would build and overflow. But what he felt now was different. The feeling moved through him and then passed, leaving behind a calm he had not expected. He realized then that reactions are often borrowed energy. They come from the past, from old patterns that repeat themselves when given the chance. By not reacting, he was breaking a familiar rhythm. And in doing so, he felt free. Not victorious, not triumphant, just free. The silence did not erase what had been said. It did not change the situation, but it changed him. He remained whole, untouched. His inner world stayed intact. As time moved on, he found more moments like this. Each one asked the same quiet question: react or remain? Each time he chose silence, the choice became a little less heavy. The pause grew more familiar, the stillness less foreign. He began to see silence not as something he withheld, but as something he offered himself. A kind of protectio. A boundary that did not need to be explained. There were times when words would eventually come, when speaking felt true and grounded. But now, speech was no longer a reflex, it was a decision. Have you ever felt the difference between words that rise from calm and words that escape from tension? He felt it clearly. Choosing not to answer did not make him smaller. It did not take anything away from him. If anything, it returned something he had lost without noticing: a sense of dignity. He stood in those moments without needing to prove anything, without needing to shape how he was seen. The silence carried him, steady and firm. Not everyone understood it. That no longer mattered. What mattered was the feeling that followed, a quiet respect for himself, a trust that he could remain present without being pulled into every passing moment. In choosing silence, he was choosing alignment over reaction, depth over noise, self-respect over temporary relief. And each time he did, the decision saved him from something he could not always name, from regret, from exhaustion, from losing himself in exchanges that led nowhere. It was a small decision, one breath, one pause. But within it lived a strength that changed how he moved through the world. Over time, something subtle began to grow inside him. It did not announce itself. It did not arrive with certainty or pride. It grew quietly, the way steady things often do, beneath the surface, unnoticed even by the one car. Restraint, he learned, has a rhythm. At first it feels like effort, like holding a door closed against a strong wind. But slowly the wind weakens. Not because the world has changed, but because the inner stance has. He noticed that moments which once disturbed him now passed more gently. Words that would have stayed with him for days now faded more quickly. His thoughts no longer chased every sound. They rested more easily. This did not mean he felt less. In fact, he felt more, but the feelings no longer controlled him. They moved through him, leaving behind understanding rather than chaos. Have you ever felt that kind of growth? The kind that does not feel exciting but feels solid. the kind that cannot be pointed to yet can be trusted. Restraint began to shape his days in small ways. He listened longer. He noticed pauses others rushed to fill. He sensed when silence was enough and when words truly mattered. This quiet discipline brought clarity. Not sudden insight, but a slow sharpening of awareness. He could see situations for what they were without needing to fix them. He could sense when engagement would bring depth and when it would only drain him. There was strength in this knowing. He realized that reacting had once given him a feeling of importance, a sense of presence. But it had also left him tired, scattered, pulled in too many directions. Restraint, on the other hand, gathered him inward. It taught him that not every moment asks for his energy. Not every feeling needs expression. Some experiences are meant to pass through without leaving a mark. At first, this felt like loss, as if he were giving something up. But over time, he understood that what he was releasing had never truly belonged to him. It was noise, habit, the weight of constant readiness. What remained was steadiness. He began to trust himself more, trust that he would know when to speak, trust that silence would not erase him, trust that his worth did not depend on constant response. This trust became the foundation of a quiet confidence, one that did not seek reassurance, one that did not rush to be visible. Others may not have noticed the change, but he felt it deeply, in the way his breath settled, in the way his body relaxed, in the way his thoughts became less sharp, less urgent. Restraint gave him space to choose who he wanted to be in each moment, not based on pressure, not based on fear, but based on alignment with himself. There is a certain peace that comes from knowing you will not abandon yourself for the sake of reaction, from knowing that your inner world is protected by your own awareness. He felt that peace growing. It did not make him distant. It made him present, fully there without being pulled apart by every passing emotion. The more he practiced restraint, the more natural it became. What once required effort now felt like instinct. Silence no longer felt like something he was holding. It felt like something he was standing within. And within that stillness, he discovered a deeper respect for himself. Not pride, not superiority, just a calm acknowledgement of his own limits and values. He understood now that growth does not always come from action. Sometimes it comes from what we choose not to do, from what we allow to pass without claiming it. Restraint shaped him quietly, patiently. It did not rush him. It did not demand perfection. It only asked for presence. And in giving that presence again and again, he became stronger in a way that did not need to be proven. The strength of someone who knows when to remain still. As the change settled deeper within him, something became quietly clear. Very few noticed. The world around him continued much as it always had. Voices rose and fell. Reactions came quickly, as they always did. And through it all, his steadiness moved almost unseen. They did not comment on it. They did not ask what had changed. To them, he appeared much the same, perhaps quieter, perhaps more distant. But the transformation that mattered most did not announce itself. There is a strange humility in this kind of growth. When the effort you make inside yourself does not alter how others treat you, when the strength you build receives no recognition. At first, this felt disappointing. He wondered briefly if the work he was doing mattered at all, if growth that goes unseen is truly growth. But then he noticed something important. He no longer needed to be said. The quiet discipline had shifted his center inward. Approval no longer felt essential. Understanding no longer felt urgent. The absence of recognition no longer felt like a loss. Have you ever experienced that moment when you realize that something which once mattered deeply has gently loosened its hold on you? They continued to misunderstand him at times. Silence still invited interpretation, still left room for stories that were not his. But those stories no longer reached him in the same way. He listened without absorbing. He observed without reacting. Their words passed by like weather, noticed but not carried. This did not mean he had stopped caring. It meant he had learned where his care belonged. He began to see that many changes are meant to remain private, that inner growth does not require witnesses to be real, that the most important shifts often happen quietly, beneath the surface, where they can take root without interference. There was freedom in this invisibility. He could move through moments without performing, without signaling strength, without proving depth. The silence gave him room to be exactly as he was without explanation. Sometimes he noticed how others mistook his calm for emptiness, how they filled the quiet with their own assumptions, and instead of resisting, he let them, not out of indifference but out of clarity. He understood now that being seen accurately by everyone was never possible, and chasing that understanding had once cost him more than it ever gave back. The strength he had gained through restraint did not need to be acknowledged to exist. It lived in how he felt at the end of each day, in the way his thoughts settled more easily, in the way he could remain present without tension. This was enough. There is a peace that comes from knowing your growth is not dependent on reaction or reward, that it belongs to you alone, quiet, steady, unmoved by opinion. He carried that peace with him, not as a shield but as a grounding, something that stayed even when others did not notice. Especially then, and in moments of stillness when the world felt distant and quiet, he sensed a deep satisfaction. Not pride, not accomplishment, just a calm knowing that he was no longer at war with himself. They never noticed the change, but he did. And that made all the difference. The quiet strength he had built did not ask to be seen. It simply remained. In time, the quiet he carried no longer felt like something he was holding on to. It felt like something that held him, a steady presence beneath his thoughts, beneath his days, beneath every small moment that once would have unsettled him. His life did not become simpler on the outside. Situations still arose, words were still spoken, silences still appeared where answers were expected. But inside there was a difference that did not fade. He felt rooted, not unmoving, not closed, just grounded in a way he had never known before, as if his inner world had found its own balance, independent of what passed around him. The silence he had chosen so many times had shaped him gently. It had taught him patience without force, strength without display, respect without demand. He no longer measured himself by how quickly he responded or how clearly he was understood. Those measures had fallen away on their own without struggle. What remained was something quieter and far more reliable, a sense of inner steadiness. When emotions arose, he felt them fully, but they no longer carried him away. They arrived, spoke in their own way, and then passed. He stayed. There is a deep peace in knowing you can remain present through your own feelings without needing to escape them, in knowing that silence is not something to fear, but something to trust. Have you ever noticed how still water reflects clearly? How it does not rush, yet shows what is true? That was how his inner life began to feel. He did not seek isolation. He did not withdraw from the world. He simply met it differently, with less urgency, with more care, with a calm that came from within rather than from control. The small decision he had made long ago to pause instead of react had quietly shaped everything that followed. It had saved him from countless moments of regret he would never have to carry, from words spoken too quickly, from actions that would have pulled him away from himself. No one marked the change. There was no moment when the world stopped, and acknowledged it. And that felt right. Some things are not meant to be celebrated loudly. They are meant to be lived quietly. In the evenings, when the world softened and the noise of the day faded, he felt a deep gratitude, not for what he had gained, but for what he had learned to release. The need to be right, the need to be seen, the need to answer every call for reaction. In letting these go, he had found something rare, a sense of wholeness that did not depend on circumstances. His silence was no longer a response to others. It was an expression of alignment with himself, a reflection of inner order. And within that order there was freedom. Freedom to speak when words mattered. Freedom to remain quiet when they did not. Freedom to move through life without being pulled apart by every passing moment. The life that Quiet built was not dramatic. It did not seek attention. It did not rush forward. It unfolded steadily, one calm decision at a time. And as he rested within that stillness, listening to his own breath, he understood something simple and enduring. True strength does not announce itself. It does not argue. It does not hurry. It remains. And in remaining, it carries you safely through whatever comes next.